One cold morning in a small coastal town in Oregon, a young man was walking alone along the beach near Alsea Bay. Suddenly, he saw something suspicious in the water. As soon as he got closer, all doubts left his mind. It was a body. Drownings were not uncommon here, unfortunately, as in other coastal towns. But this time things were much more complicated. And this discovery was just the beginning of a story that brought tears to the eyes of even the most experienced detectives and the FBI. Passers-by on the beach immediately called 911. Police and Detective Denis Bosky arrived at the scene. The police were shocked by what they saw. It was a boy wearing only underwear, about 3 to 4 years old. The boy's fingernails and toenails were neatly trimmed, all of which looked like an unfortunate accident, as there were no signs on the victim's skin that suggested he had been abused or tortured. Bosky expected the child's parents to arrive soon, and he would have to break the terrible news to them. However, several hours had passed and no one had reported the child missing. The police began assembling an investigation team that included investigators from local, state, and federal agencies. All the experts involved in the investigation believed that this was an unfortunate accident. However, in just one day, they were asking a series of questions. Why was no one looking for the child? Who and where were the parents? Had the whole family been in trouble and no one was left to look for the boy? Cases like this are always complicated, because the investigation team must quickly start working and test all their theories. But with only one body, there were too many theories to come up with. The police began knocking on doors in the area looking for boys of the same age, since the family may not have lived there but were just visiting. At the same time, they had to consider other theories as well. The Coast Guard was asked to fly along the bay and 4 nearby service roads to check for any car accidents, possibly a vehicle that had gone into the water, or boat accidents that the boy may have been on with his parents. However, extensive searches turned up nothing. The investigators decided to get the public's attention. They drew a sketch of the boy and put it in the newspapers. The news quickly spread across local television stations. Among those watching the news was Denise Thompson. When she saw the portrait, she was horrified. The boy looked a lot like Zachary, a 4-year-old boy Denise often babysat. Denise immediately called her neighbor, a local police chief, and said, "That boy on the news looks like someone I know." Denise told investigators that she worked with Zachary's father, Christian Longo, at a local Starbucks. The Longos lived near the waterfront in Newport, but were not home at the time. Conversations with neighbors were also fruitless, as the Longos had only recently moved there and did not have many close relationships. Investigators were at a near standstill, but they quickly realized that no one in Oregon could tell them what had happened there, so they decided to search for clues at the site where the boy's body was found. A police dive team was called in, but no one could have imagined what they were about to find underwater. When the team reached the bottom, instead of finding any clues to help the investigation, they discovered a sleeping bag, inside of which was the body of a young girl. A girl younger than Zachary was also wearing only underwear and a pillowcase with a rock tied around her ankle. Someone had deliberately taken her life. Based on her age and appearance, police speculated that she was Zachary's younger sister, 3-year-old Sadie Longo. The dive team continued searching and found a second sleeping bag, but it was empty, with only another pillowcase containing a rock. Since Zachary was found untethered, they deduced that he had also drowned, but the pillowcase around his leg had come loose, allowing him to float to the surface. The detectives and police officers were stunned and could not believe what they had seen. It was the first time in his career that Detective Denis Bosky shed tears right at the docks. Over the years, Denise has done his job well, as difficult as it was, because someone had to do it. But no amount of experience has prepared him for the haunting question, why God? Why a 3-year-old? Neither the FBI nor the local police know who killed the 2 children, and possibly the rest of the family. They don't know if it was a vicious predator or someone the children knew and trusted. In the case of children so young, the list of people they trusted in such a new area is short. Could Christian and Mary Jane Longo have done this? But where were they? What about Madison? Maybe their bodies were washed away by the current or hidden elsewhere. The questions only grow, but the answers remain. Eventually, information began to come in from people who had seen the news and police reports. Detectives had to check out every tip they received. One informant said that the night before Zachary's body was discovered, he had stopped to help a man who was having trouble with his car. This happened on a bridge near where the boy later surfaced. As he drove by, he noticed the warning lights were on and thought the driver needed help. But the man replied that it was nothing serious. He had just stopped to wait for some dashboard lights to go off. The informant remembered that the answer sounded strange, but he could not remember the make or even color of the car. Police still held out hope that they would receive more concrete leads from the public. They went back to the person who found Zachary in the water and called 911. Criminals often try to interfere with investigations to remove themselves from the list of suspects. What if this was one of those cases? It turned out the man had a criminal record involving children. However, the new suspect claimed that he had attended an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting the night before he found Zachary. Detectives searched the building where the meeting took place, combing through every room and hallway, even the local staff offices. They sprayed a special substance called luminol, a substance used by forensic experts to detect traces of blood. Everything was clean, except in the bathroom, where streaks of blue light appeared on the walls, sending chills down everyone's spines. Had they found the culprit? Blood samples were collected and sent to the lab for testing. While the police awaited the results, they were unable to arrest the suspect. Detective Bosky worried that he might flee, but surprisingly, the suspect himself took the initiative to ask to take a lie detector test and talk about his troubled past, fearing that he would be framed for a crime he did not commit. It turned out that many people who attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings used drugs in that bathroom. Some of them attended these meetings at the request of their families or the authorities. The suspect shamefully admitted that he was also an addict and that those bathrooms were horrible in every way, but no child had ever died at his hands. While waiting for the results of blood tests, FBI detectives continued to expand their search for Mary Jane and Christian Longo. They tracked down Mary Jane's relatives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Mary Jane had known Christian Longo since she was about 12 years old, and Longo was only 17. They had many common interests and came from divorced families. They also shared a deep religious faith. Christian was Mary Jane's first love. In the spring of 1993, the couple married. In February 1997, their first child, Zachary, was born. Other children followed. Christian started a construction site cleaning company and his business initially flourished. He worked hard to provide for the family while Mary Jane stayed home to take care of the children and keep the household running. Mary Jane's brother described the relationship as worshiping Christian's every move. Mary Jane and Christian seemed to be living the dream life until Christian's business began to struggle. Some customers failed to pay on time, and he couldn't pay his employees. Financial problems mounted. Embarrassed by his failure and drowning in debt, Christian decided to move his family west. In September 2001, they moved to Newport, Oregon, where he found a beachfront apartment and worked at a local coffee shop. It was there that he met Dennis Thompson, and they quickly became friends. Dennis told investigators that Christian was very personable and easy to work with. After getting to know him better, Dennis began to worry that his family might be struggling because they had no friends or family nearby. So Dennis offered to babysit their children sometimes so that Christian and his wife could date or spend time alone together. While the FBI gathered information from Michigan, where the couple had lived, the forensics lab completed analysis of blood samples found at the building where Alcoholics Anonymous held meetings. The results showed that the blood samples did not match any of the children, but belonged to the people who attended those meetings, just as the suspect had said. The suspect also passed a polygraph test, so all charges against him were dropped. At the same time, police received a report of evidence being examined from the hotel where the Longo family had stayed during their early days in Newport before moving into the apartment. FBI agents had previously received a tip from the hotel maid that she had found a family album, personal items, and the children's birth certificates. That evidence led police to Christian Longo's fingerprints, but it also raised more questions. Why were such important things left behind? What kind of mother would leave behind her papers and identification? What happened? And why did the family leave in such a hurry that they forgot such important things? The discovery left the investigation team feeling uneasy and uncertain. They decided to expand their search underwater, where Zachary and Sadie's bodies were found. And what they found was horrifying. Just a short distance from the pier, divers discovered 2 suitcases. A lock of hair was protruding from one of the suitcase's zippers. Denise Boski had the divers drag the suitcases up the pier. In one suitcase, they found Mary Jane's body, and in the other, little Madison's. Both had been strangled to death, with obvious marks on their necks. What shocked the police even more was the brutality with which the killer had treated Mary Jane. She was barely dressed, and her hair was trapped in the zippers of the suitcases. But where was the children's father, Christian Longo? Suddenly, Denise Thompson recalled a detail that she had previously considered unimportant. But now that 4 bodies had been found and Christian was still missing, it could become important. Denise remembered that on the night she had babysat the Longos, just days before Zachary's death, Christian had looked extremely stressed when he and his wife returned from a late-night date. Christian's eyes were red, like he had been crying. Just days later at work, Christian shocked Denise by suddenly announcing that his wife Mary Jane had left him, taking the children with her. Detective Denise Boski recalled the case, saying that detectives in cases like this are often limited by their own imagination and experience. As a decent man, even at the time, he thought that what had happened in the family could have been a tragic coincidence. The couple's conflicts could only have been exploited by their enemies, or it could have been a real tragedy that Christian could not face. Detective Denise Boski considered the possibility that Christian could not bear what had happened, killed his wife and children, and then committed suicide. While this was a terrible hypothesis, it did not justify his actions if it were true. The case turned up more and more bodies, but there were no concrete clues for the police. The FBI and detectives had no choice but to continue digging into the Longo family's past. Suddenly, a detailed profile of Christian opened up before their eyes with a story full of lies and deceit. Christian's parents recounted details of their son's life and deceitful behavior. Despite being raised in a religious family, Christian was a blatant and passionate liar. On one occasion, he even defrauded his own parents of a large sum of money. He later begged forgiveness and promised to improve his life, earning his parents' trust in him again. However, the more detectives investigated Christian's acquaintances in Michigan, the more they saw a portrait of a charming liar and manipulator, but also a hot-tempered and paranoid individual. Christian was willing to engage in fraud and debt to avoid admitting failure. When his business struggled, Christian began writing fake checks to himself in the company's name to maintain the appearance that the money was still flowing. He also wrote fake checks to employees. One day, we went to the bank to cash a counterfeit check. Christian noticed the suspicious look on the bank teller's face and realized he was in trouble. Terrified, Christian ran away, leaving his passport on the counter. The police arrested him for writing bad checks, and his secret was exposed. Christian was sentenced to probation, but he was now shunned by his entire religious community, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Mary Jane also suffered shame and humiliation as people around her avoided contact with her family. In this situation, Christian decided to move his wife and children to an old warehouse in Ohio, which he planned to convert into apartments. However, he continued to commit fraud to pay off his debts, even stealing about $20,000 worth of construction equipment and trying to sell it. The buyer suspected something was wrong and reported it to the police. Sensing that he was about to be caught, Christian relied on his survival instincts and fled with his family to Oregon. Now that detectives had this information, they were able to return and search the Longo family's former home. What they found confirmed that the family had fled in a hurry, leaving behind many belongings, including Mary Jane's wedding dress, Bibles, family photo albums, and diplomas. This also explains the items found in the Newport hotel. Christian was worried that they would be discovered and left the hotel in a hurry. Mary Jane's family, including her siblings, were very concerned about her disappearance and reported her to the police. However, the search was quickly stopped when the family received a postcard from Mary Jane from South Dakota, saying that everything was fine. Christian was looking for work, and she was settling into her new life. Had Christian's creditors found him and taken revenge, or was Mary Jane angry that he had put her family in danger and decided to leave but didn't make it in time? Everything changed abruptly when a call came in from Christian's former employer. The employer reported that Christian Longo was alive and well, and that he had just applied for a job at a Starbucks in San Francisco. He had even contacted his former employer to ask for a letter of recommendation. At this point, all doubts about the man's identity were cleared. Now, the detectives know they are hunting a monster who murdered his wife and children and is now trying to evade the law to start a new life. Detective Dennis Boski immediately contacted the FBI office in San Francisco and asked that agents be sent to watch the Starbucks, hoping that Christian Longo would return. However, Christian apparently realized his mistake, and he never returned to the coffee shop. However, Longo left a trail. The FBI discovered that he had used a stolen credit card number to make a transaction. This allowed agents to track his movements. Christian Longo bought a plane ticket from San Francisco to Texas, then flew from Texas to Cancun, Mexico. In Cancun, Christian was closely monitored by the FBI. The FBI agent's job here was mainly to catch people who took advantage of the Mexican border crossing to evade U.S. law. In the early 2000s, Americans could enter Mexico without showing a passport. Christian Longo quickly found himself on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Local agents plastered posters with Longo's image all over Cancun and the surrounding areas. Their best hope was for public support, because sooner or later someone would recognize him. And sure enough, less than 48 hours after Christian Longo was wanted in Mexico, a tour guide in Cancun reported that a few days earlier he had given a tour to a man who closely matched Longo's description. He had then dropped the man off at a campsite outside the city. FBI agents moved quickly and quietly, surrounding the campsite late in the evening. They easily found Longo's tent. He did not appear to be distressed or distressed, but was enjoying his vacation with a new woman, a freelance photographer from Germany. He introduced himself to her as Michael, a freelance journalist. As Mexican police and FBI agents dragged Christian Longo out of the tent, he shouted that he was Michael and demanded that they release him immediately. However, when the officers asked, "Christian Michael Longo, is that you?" he fell silent and stopped resisting. While Longo had the choice of voluntarily returning to the United States or fighting extradition from a Mexican prison. The latter option was clearly a terrifying prospect, so Longo decided to surrender to U.S. authorities. Still, he refused to admit guilt and answered questions with religious overtones. According to Christian Longo, in his belief, Mary Jane and the children were simply sleeping. However, the detectives could still indirectly get a confession from the criminal. "I wanted them to go to a better place," Longo said. Christian Longo's trial was scheduled for February 2003. Until then, detectives, prosecutors, and the FBI had to continue gathering evidence, as they had little direct evidence against him. They were concerned that Longo might evade responsibility. The case would be decided by a jury, which worried them most. A month before the trial, Christian Longo suddenly panicked. He realized that even with little direct evidence, the circumstantial evidence was enough to convict him at any level. In the eyes of the jury, he was as much of a threat as the prosecutor and detectives, because his guilt was so obvious. Christian Longo admitted his guilt in the deaths of his wife, Mary Jane, and youngest daughter, Madison, just before the trial began. However, he refused to explain his reasons for his actions, and also did not admit his involvement in the deaths of Zachary and Sadie. Everyone understood that this was Longo's last-ditch effort to avoid the death penalty, but everyone breathed a sigh of relief that he would never be free again. The trial began on March 10, 2003. During the trial, Longo gave a new testimony. He said that Mary Jane was the one who killed Zachary and Sadie. When he returned home, she was mentally unstable and was trying to kill Madison. In a fit of rage, Longo strangled Mary Jane and had to finish Madison because she was still alive, but could not survive what her mother had done. This story, based on the evidence gathered and the attempt to blame Mary Jane after she was dead, was so unbelievable that it only caused outrage from everyone present at the trial. The jury did not believe Christian and found him guilty on 4 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced him to death. Later, In an interview from prison, Christian Longo admitted that he deliberately killed his entire family because he was financially bankrupt and did not want them to witness his failure. Longo said he made that decision that same day. While making love to his wife, he realized the moment was right and strangled her in bed. His next victim was his youngest daughter, Madison. He put the bodies in suitcases, drove to the beach, and dumped them in the water. He then returned home, picked up Zachary and Sadie, and drove a little further from where he had just dumped the bodies of his wife and daughter to dispose of the other 2 children. It was here that his car was seen by a witness who questioned the flashing lights, prompting Christian to stop. After finishing, Christian returned home, showered, dressed up, and went to the Christmas party, appearing like a single man whose wife had just left him. In early 2001, while on death row, Longo attempted to donate his organs as an act of atonement, but the offer was rejected and deemed another of his scams. That same year, the governor of Oregon issued a moratorium on the death penalty. A year later, 17 death row inmates, including Longo, had their sentences commuted to life without parole.